that at the bottom of everything, of any science, of any rational study, there are assumptions about the universe that cannot, not that aren't proved, that cannot be proved. Cannot. Because we cannot prove that this exists. We simply cannot prove that the point exists, or the line, or the plane. We can prove the solid exists, but these first three things are unprovable. Absolutely unprovable assumptions, right? And of course, 20th century mathematicians have thrown them out. Okay? They don't use them anymore. They've gone on to, you know, Riemann and God knows who else. I don't know. I haven't kept up with it. Right? But I think this is a key issue. And then he says it even further. He goes even further. He says every demonstrative science, geometry is a demonstrative science because you can demonstrate things, must start from indemonstrable principles. Otherwise, the steps of demonstration would be endless. Wow. So it's never going to happen, is what he's saying. Not only don't we know the answers to these things, but it's never going to happen. Yeah.
Does that mean it could be endless because you could work backwards?
Yeah, if you work backwards, you never stop.
Yeah, okay,
There's no place to stop. And I think the physicists are confronting this now, really very strongly. This slide, I think, is being confronted by modern physics. Because they've gone completely beyond objects. There are no more objects for these guys to analyze or to play with. You know? And they're talking about particles, but they aren't really particles anymore. They're talking about other kinds of entities now, the strings. I mean, how can you get more Pythagorean than strings? I don't know. Or Orphic. How do you get more Orphic than strings? For God's sake, right? I mean, you want to talk about God playing the music of the spheres.
My heartstrings.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, the further they get, the more Pythagorean it gets, really, for my taste. And they're not going to solve anything. In fact, there was an article, I didn't bring it, I wanted to try to work it into this, and I may for later on. But there was an article in Scientific American. I read Scientific American, it's kind of like an in-between magazine. You know, it's not, well, it's not just junk journalism, you know what I mean? It's not just journalism where they make sound bites out of everything.
I thought you meant in between to give you a break from the architecture magazine.
Oh, well, that's true. No, that's true, too. Oh, yeah, no,
and the Martha Stewart.
Well, I have to tell you the truth. I had to stop reading architectural magazines in the late 70s when I started studying classicism. Because you can't read them anymore once you start studying.
I know.
And what was the other? There was another thing that I stopped reading also. I don't know, the Times or whatever it is. I stopped. But all right. So, but this is, I think, a very important key here because if you just integrate this into your thinking, then you break the thrall. Right? We're under a thrall, okay, of science. We're under the thrall of science. People talk. If you listen to the popular rhetoric of science, this is why I made that distinction about the magazine, because it's not journalism, but it's not technical data publishing either. If you read, Nature or Journal of Atomic Physics, well, you get the data, right? You get like 28 pages. Well, I can't use the data. I'm not going to do anything with the data. But I just want to know the ideas, and I want to put in ordinary language, but I don't want to read the soundbite, right? Because the soundbite is misleading, and it's always wrong, okay? The whole discussion about genetics, completely up the wazoo. I mean, there's not a rational word that I've heard said in the last 20 years about genetics. Evolution, God help us. Wow, there's a topic you can't discuss rationally in America. It's just crazy. Maybe in Europe you can discuss it rationally. Even there, I'm not sure. Anyway, so this is a very important point, and I just, I can't stress this one enough. So let's try to move on. This one, I'm not so sure about this slide. These are the principles. Again, it's...
Can we finish in about 5 minutes?
It's more of the same. Okay, this is just more of the same.
Well, I didn't mean to read it.
And, no, okay, and this is more dark stuff, from Plato, kind of. This is from, I think this is from the Laws, where this is from the Republic. This is this famous thing in the Republic called the myth of Ur. Which is a shamanic journey, basically, at the end of the Republic. He tacks this on at the end of the Republic. Obviously there was someplace he wanted to go that he really didn't want to be specific about going, so he tacks this myth. He either writes this himself or he pulls it from some other stuff that he's heard. And he imagines this guy being taken up to a great height. One of the things that happens to the shaman is that their spirit helper takes them up to a great height, right, and shows them the floor plan of the universe. Right? Shows them where it is, what it is, or where they're in it, what it is, how it works and everything, and then they take them back down, right? And the shaman all have various terms for this. A lot of times it's going up to the top of the sacred mountain or whatever. But here he's just he goes up on the pole. Right, the universe is a series of spheres that are set one within the other, and there's an axis through them, and they're turning on this axis, right? And he imagines it as though there's a spindle, like when you're spinning yarn, right? So they have this illustration of the spindle. The spindle is sticking in right there. And everything is turning. Everything is turning around that spindle, and he says. Plato declares that the substance of the axis is hard as adamant, thus indicating unchangeable being, because the axis is a line, right? So if the sphere, it is governing the sphere, right? There's a point in the center and there's two poles, right? And the sphere is turning around it, and so, but the sphere is moving, but because the line has only one dimension, right? It is actually not moving. It can't move. Even though the sphere is turning, the only way you can measure the turn is by the distance from the center. But if there's no distance, there's no movement. So the central point and the axis remain always at rest. Right? So he calls it adamant because it never changes. So there's a kind of a symbolism that he's using, like a verbal symbolism. So this is like philosophical myth-making. But then there was Earth. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back.
Rotation of the Earth.
It's part of it. Yeah, it's part of it. So he goes, and then so this is one kind. This is philosophical myth. But then Proclus going on, and he says the Pythagoreans claim that the pole should be called the seal of Rhea, as the place where the life-giving goddess dispenses her mysterious and effective powers to all. And the center, they said, is the guardhouse of Zos. I tried to look this up. I couldn't find anything on it. There was one guy who wrote a paper, but it wasn't available. So, but it's Zeus. It's basically Zeus's eye. He sets his creative watch in the bosom of the cosmos and establishes it there in the middle. All right. Or if the center is fixed, everything maintains its order. Right? So this is Proclus telling you the kind of stuff that Euclid edited out. Right? This is what he would have had to edit out. These were the Pythagorean views and the Platonic views. It's either overt myth, where there's a divinity that's named, or it's a philosophical myth. So let's see where we go. Oh, I'm sorry. I went back. Okay. This is a whole other myth. I don't even know if I even want to take the time to do this right now. This is called the Tetracktys, this thing. And this is an equilateral triangle. So we're back to Euclid again with that equilateral triangle. And it's what's called morphic arithmetic. This is an example of what's called morphic arithmetic, right? Shape arithmetic. Where you get 1, 2, 3, and 4. But they're not numbers. These things, these sigils, right? These things down here, were not invented, I think, until like the 7th or 8th century A.D. And they didn't get to Europe until like the 13th century A.D., right, where they came under this man Phileas Bonacci, known as Fibonacci. But anyway, that's another story. So here's this morphic construction of this triangle, and this whole thing, this has 4 levels. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and 4, just like the creation story. Okay, and so we can put all these things on it, and here I'm putting all 5 of the solids on because the dodecahedron is the containment of it all. Again, it sort of represents the car there. So this is yet another story, and let's see where this leads us. And this leads us to the Timaeus, because this creation story in the Timaeus, which uses number, geometry, music, and astronomy in that order, can be put on the symbol of the Tetracktys. The steps that Plato uses in his discussion can be diagrammed in terms of the Tetracktys, right? So number is just that pure shape. The geometry aspect already is here in the triangle. And then he takes the triangle down here into the musical realm. This is called the lambda figure. This is the Greek letter L. It was this shape, this inverted V shape. He puts these numbers on it. The numbers become the numbers of the musical octave. The 2 legs get combined here into what he calls a strip. The strip gets cut down the middle, placed in the shape of the chi, the cross, into that. And then he wraps them around, and they become the circles of the same and the different. We're called the circles of the same and the different.
The equator and the ecliptic.
The circle of the different is, I'm sorry?
Well, the equator and the ecliptic, isn't it? It's like the equator and the ecliptic.
This is the zodiacal band, and this is the ecliptic here, the circle of the different. This is where the planets are.
Right.
So this is another creation story. Let's keep going. Now here's yet another one that, again, uses the vesica Pisces specifically. So back to the vesica. This is Euclid's first principle, first demonstration, is this vesica. And the vesica has this history of being part of these creation myths. This is from, this is a figure from a man named David Fiedler, who's a brilliant guy. He's still out there somewhere. I don't know what he's doing now, but he's not doing anything basically. But he has this published in his book, and this is gematria. This is what's called gematria. Before the numbers, before the sigils, right? Before these sigils, the West used two things to do arithmetic. They used those little pebbles that we saw in the Tetracktys, right? Those little round dots. Right? So you could take 10 of those little marbles. You could make a triangle out of it. If you had a crater, right, one of these bowls, and you just put 10 of those things, 10 marbles in the bowl, they'll form that by themselves, right? So here what he's doing is he's assigning numerical values to certain ratios. We have A, he has A to A, B to B, and C to C. And you can see that these are all vesica Pisces relationships. One of the other things I didn't mention before is that the relationship of that to that in the vesica Pisces is the relation of 1 to the square root of 3. That's why it makes the triangle. Okay. So these relationships, it turns out that the names Apollo, Zeus, and Hermes, in Greek gematria, number letter substitution, because the other thing they had was letters. They had the round pebbles, but they had letters. So in Greek and Hebrew as well, and in Sanskrit I believe as well too, although I don't know the system, every letter is also a number. Right? So that means that in the Western scriptural tradition, which is Greek and Hebrew, right? Because the Old Testament is written in Greek, and the Old Testament is written in Hebrew, the New Testament is written in Greek. Every word is a number, and every name is a number. And it turns out that those people who've looked into them, people like John Michel and so on, have looked into these things, find that it isn't just any numbers. They're not random numbers. And here's an example that Fiedler shows, and I think John Michel shows it too, of the relation of Zeus, Hermes, and Apollo, right? So if 1061, I think this, B to B, yeah, B, no, okay, I'm sorry, B to B is 612, C to C, okay, it's smaller, okay. So A to A is Apollo, B to B is Zeus, and C to C is Hermes. So those names express the powers of 3, in effect. They express mathematical functions that they usually express through algebra. There's a whole other dimension to these guys, right? And then they have mythic relations, right? Now we heard a little bit about the lyre, right, before. And in fact, what happens is, Apollo gives Orpheus the lyre, but the lyre is actually created by Hermes, right? Who trades it to Zeus in a deal that they cut, who trades it to Apollo in a deal cut by Zeus. Mm-hmm. So these 3 guys have a myth that encapsulates that form, if you want to read it that way, right? Now, then what happens in the syncretic period in Alexandria, with all the libraries in existence, in the centuries, I'd say probably from about 50 BC to about 250 AD, you have this incredible period of syncretism. And it doesn't just affect, it affects Judaism, it affects Christianity. I'm certain that Islam comes out of it in some probably less direct way, because it's a few hundred years later, but still the foundations of it are there. So I think one of the things that happened is that the 10 dots of the Tetracktys, which are here, get repositioned on this diagram of Psyche. This is the diagram of Psyche, right, of the Greek Psyche. And here's these 10 dots, right, that fit in there. The 10 dots get repositioned. You don't have to do very much work. You don't have to move them very far either. And you get the tree. Right? Now, I'm not going to go into all this about what all these dots mean and stuff. All right, so that's about it for me. We could go through the temple with more trees. You have Christian architecture, right? You have Muslim architecture. You have Euclid. This is what it leads up to. There's another creation story here, and so on. So I think I'll call it. There's more, but
I'm sorry we have
go
to.
on. No, it's all right. I don't mind.
Steve?
Yeah.
Quick question,
Yeah, sure.
because I was fascinated about
Thank you
the
very
story. There are degrees of stories. There are creation myths, creation stories that are more transparent, presumably, of reality, and that's how Sophia became the queen of the liberal arts. Because when you have astronomy, grammar, rhetoric, arithmetic, music, and all of that. That's a more true. See, that's where the language becomes transparent. So Mercurius, as language, because Mercurius can be either a liar or he's a shapeshifter. He can either language can either hide or it can reveal. So the creation myth that Steve was talking about, someone was asking before about the story. Well, how do you get a better story? That story is that's where the language is transparent. What is it transparent to? It's transparent to psyche, it's transparent to the astronomy, and to our relationship, the human relationship between us and the stars. So the transparency of the language is the creation, is the creation myth that is more appropriate, and that's why it's associated with the 7 liberal arts that Sophia became the queen of.
I had a point that I was going to mention something, and I think I just lost it. So
Well, listen, I don't
I have one very small question. I don't understand the term vesica Pisces, and I follow the geometry, but vesica Pisces, what does it have to do with fish?
It's supposedly the shape. Vesica, it means bladder of the fish, or fish bladder, if you one translation.
Oh, bladder.
Right.
I was thinking some kind of vessel. Okay.
Supposedly the early Christians used to use it as the symbol of the meeting place.
Oh, I know that one, yeah.
That was the best.
By extending it,
Also,
I'll get the
Pisces,
tail.
it's a pun though, Carl, because it has to do with the Piscean age. It has to do with the Piscean month.
listen, I hope that
We're in the Piscean month now.
Oh, yes,
Right?
logical.
So when they talk about Vesica Pisces, it's a pun on that as well. And of course, he's a fisherman and he walks on water and he does,
Were all these geometric diagrams revealed in that Library of Alexandria?
Oh, they all were dealt with in one fashion or another.
And were they invented there?
No, they weren't. No, they pre-existed.
They were collected.
They were collected, yeah.
Here's a very
One
good,
second,
good book I can
before people
recommend. I'm
leave.
sure
Hold
the
on.
gentlemen know the
we have. Hold on, people. We have one more presentation, so don't leave yet. Yes, hold on.